At Christmas, 20 years after my son abandoned me, he reappeared and said, "Did you put the house in my name?" Can you imagine the audacity? The sheer nerve of someone who disappeared from your life without a trace, leaving you to wonder if they were even alive, showing up at your doorstep after 2 decades with their hand already extended, expecting what they believe is rightfully theirs. I'm telling you this story because I need you to understand the depth of betrayal, the years of sleepless nights, the tears I shed wondering what I did wrong as a mother. But more importantly, I need you to understand why what I did next was not just justified, it was necessary. My name is Diane, and I'm 65 years old now. I've lived through things that would break most people, but I've learned that sometimes the universe has a funny way of teaching lessons to those who think they can take advantage of others' love and kindness. This isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's about how karma works in the most unexpected ways, and how sometimes the people we least expect become our greatest allies. 20 years ago, my world crumbled in the span of one heated argument. Brandon, my only child, was 22 then, old enough to know better, but young enough to think he knew everything. He had always been a difficult child, not in the way some kids are mischievous or rebellious, but in that cold, calculating way that makes you wonder where you went wrong as a parent. Even as a teenager, he had this unsettling ability to manipulate situations to his advantage, always finding a way to make himself the victim when things didn't go his way. The fight that changed everything started over something so trivial I almost laugh thinking about it now. Brandon had been living at home rent-free since graduating college, spending his days playing video games and his nights out with friends, all while I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after his father passed away. I had asked him, not demanded, mind you, but politely asked, if he could contribute something toward the household expenses, or at least help with the chores around the house. His response? A cold stare and the words that still echo in my mind. "This house will be mine anyway when you die. Why should I pay rent in my own future property?" The callousness of those words, delivered with such casual cruelty, hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. But what came next was worse. When I tried to explain that respect and contribution weren't about ownership, but about being part of a family, about showing gratitude for the roof over his head and the food on his plate, he laughed. Actually, laughed. Then he said something that I've replayed in my mind thousands of times over the years. "You need me more than I need you, Mom. You're getting old, and this house is too big for one person. I'm doing you a favor by staying." That night, after hours of back and forth arguing where I tried desperately to reach some part of the son I thought I had raised, Brandon packed a single bag and walked out. But before he left, he turned to me with that same cold expression and said, "Don't worry about changing anything. I'll be back when you come to your senses. And when I do come back, I expect that deed to be ready with my name on it." I stood in that doorway watching him walk away, thinking he'd cool off and return in a few days. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. No phone calls, no letters, no messages through mutual friends. It was as if I had ceased to exist in his world the moment he decided I was no longer useful to him in the way he wanted. For the first 5 years, I kept his room exactly as he left it. His bed made with those superhero sheets he'd had since he was 12. His desk cluttered with old-school notebooks and collectible cards. His closet full of clothes that gradually went out of style. Every night, I'd pass by that room and feel my heart break a little more, wondering if tonight would be the night he'd call. If tomorrow would be the day he'd walk through that door with an apology and maybe, just maybe, some genuine remorse. But that call never came. That apology never materialized. And slowly, painfully, I began to accept that the son I thought I knew might have never existed at all. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends and neighbors would ask about Brandon, and I'd make excuses. He was busy with work, he was traveling, he was going through a rough patch, but we were working things out. The lies became easier to tell than the truth. that my only child had abandoned me as easily as someone throws away yesterday's newspaper. It was during the 6th year of his absence that something beautiful began to bloom in the midst of all that pain. I noticed that the young woman who had moved into the apartment next door was struggling. Lily was about 24 then, fresh out of nursing school and working double shifts at the local hospital to pay off her student loans. She lived alone, had no family nearby, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes every time she dragged herself up those stairs after another grueling day. It started with small gestures. I'd leave a plate of homemade cookies by her door with a note saying they were extras from a batch I'd made. When I'd see her coming home late, I'd casually mention that I had made too much dinner and ask if she'd like to join me so it wouldn't go to waste. Slowly, carefully, we began to form a connection that felt more natural and genuine than anything I had experienced with my own son in years. Lily had this incredible way of listening, really listening, when you spoke. She'd ask about my day, remember details from previous conversations, and showed genuine concern when I mentioned feeling under the weather. When I caught a nasty flu that winter, she showed up at my door with medicine, soup, and the kind of caring attention that I had forgotten could exist between two people. "Mrs. Diane?" she said one evening as we sat sharing tea after she'd helped me with some heavy groceries. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you've been more of a mother to me in these past few months than anyone has been in my entire adult life. I just wanted you to know how much that means to me." Those words struck something deep in my heart. Here was this young woman with no obligation to me whatsoever, showing more filial love and respect than my own flesh and blood had ever demonstrated. It was then that I began to understand something profound about the nature of family. It isn't always about blood relations. Sometimes the people who become your real family are the ones who choose to love you, day after day, without expecting anything in return. As our friendship deepened, I learned more about Lily's story. She had grown up in foster care, bouncing from one home to another, never really belonging anywhere. She had worked her way through nursing school on scholarships and by working multiple part-time jobs. She had every reason to be bitter, every excuse to be selfish, but instead, she radiated kindness and determination. When she met Jake, a kind-hearted mechanic who worked at the garage downtown, I watched their relationship blossom with the joy of a proud mother. Jake was everything I had hoped Brandon might become: respectful, hardworking, and absolutely devoted to the woman he loved. When he asked for my blessing to propose to Lily, I cried tears of joy. But the moment that truly sealed my heart was when they came to me, both of them nervous and excited, to ask if I would consider being the grandmother to their future children. "We know it might sound strange," Lily said, her eyes bright with unshed tears, "but we can't imagine starting our family without you as part of it. You've shown me what unconditional love looks like, and I want our children to experience that same kind of love from you." That night, alone in my house, I made a decision that would change everything. If Brandon had truly abandoned me, if he really believed that his only connection to me was through future inheritance, then perhaps it was time to redefine what family meant. I called Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer who had handled my husband's estate, and made an appointment to discuss my will. The years continued to pass, and my chosen family grew stronger. Lily and Jake married in a small ceremony in my backyard, with me proudly standing in as the mother of the bride. When their first child was born, a beautiful little girl they named Emma, I was in the delivery room, holding Lily's hand and crying tears of pure joy as I heard my granddaughter's first cry. Brandon's room had long since been converted into a nursery. The superhero sheets were replaced with soft pink bedding, the desk cleared to make room for a changing table, and the closet filled with tiny clothes instead of outdated teenage fashion. It felt right, like the house was finally being used for its intended purpose, to shelter and nurture a family. But even as my new life flourished, I couldn't shake the wondering about Brandon. Was he well? Had he married? Did he have children of his own? Did he ever think about me? About the mother he had left behind without so much as a goodbye? These questions haunted my quieter moments, but I had learned to live with uncertainty. 15 years passed in this new normal. I watched Emma take her first steps in my living room, helped her learn to read in my kitchen, and celebrated every milestone as any grandmother would. Lily and Jake had 2 more children, twin boys named Michael and Matthew, and our house was constantly filled with the joyful chaos of family life. It was around this time that I made my final decision about the will. Mr. Harrison had been patient with my wavering over the years, understanding the complexity of my situation. But as I sat in his office, watching through the window as Lily pushed Emma on the swing set Jake had installed in our backyard, I knew what needed to be done. "I want to leave everything to Lily," I told him firmly. "The house, my savings, everything. She's been more of a daughter to me than I ever imagined possible, and her children are my grandchildren in every way that matters." Mr. Harrison nodded solemnly. "And if Brandon should ever return?" I thought about that question for a long moment. "Then he'll learn that family isn't about what you can take from someone. It's about what you're willing to give." The paperwork was finalized just before Christmas of that year. I felt a strange sense of peace, like I had finally closed a chapter that had been left hanging for far too long. My house was full of love and laughter, my days were filled with purpose and joy, and for the first time in decades, I felt complete. Which is why, when that doorbell rang on Christmas Eve, 20 years after Brandon had walked out of my life, I couldn't have been more shocked at who I saw standing on my doorstep. There he stood, Brandon, 20 years older but with that same calculating look in his eyes. His hair was thinning, his face had filled out, and he wore an expensive-looking coat that screamed success and entitlement. But what struck me most wasn't how he looked. It was how he looked at me. There was no warmth, no recognition of the pain his absence had caused, no acknowledgement of the mother who had worried about him for 2 decades. Instead, there was that familiar cold assessment, like he was evaluating my worth based on what I could provide him. "Hello, Mother," he said, as if he had seen me just yesterday rather than having vanished from my life for 20 years. I stood there in stunned silence, my hand gripping the doorframe for support. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of our Christmas Eve celebration, Emma helping her little brothers wrap last-minute presents, Lily and Jake laughing in the kitchen while preparing tomorrow's feast, the warm chaos of a real family enjoying each other's company. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Brandon asked, pushing past me without waiting for an answer. His eyes immediately began scanning the house, taking inventory like an appraiser evaluating property. I watched him notice the changes, the family photos that didn't include him, the children's artwork on the refrigerator, the general lived-in warmth that hadn't existed when he lived here. "Who are these people?" he asked, his voice carrying a tone of annoyed confusion, as if he had expected to find me exactly as he had left me, alone, waiting, and grateful for his eventual return. Before I could answer, Emma came bounding into the room, her 8-year-old energy infectious even in this tense moment. "Grandma Diane, who's at the door? Is this one of your friends from—" She stopped short when she saw Brandon, instinctively sensing the uncomfortable atmosphere that had suddenly filled our home. "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go help Mommy in the kitchen?" I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. Brandon watched this interaction with obvious displeasure. "Grandma Diane?" he repeated, his voice sharp with something between disbelief and indignation. "Mother, what exactly is going on here?" Lily appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in my voice. She took one look at the situation and immediately understood. Over the years, I had told her everything about Brandon, about his abandonment, about the pain he had caused, about the way he had treated our home like a future investment rather than a place where love was supposed to flourish. "You must be Brandon," she said, her voice carefully neutral, but her posture protective as she moved closer to me. "And you are?" His tone was dismissive, already categorizing Lily as unimportant. "I'm Lily. This is my family." There was something in the way she said "my family" that made it clear she considered me an integral part of that unit. Brandon's expression darkened. Your family? Mother, I think we need to talk. Alone. The next few minutes were among the most surreal of my life. I found myself sitting across from my son in my own living room, feeling like a stranger in the home I had lived in for 30 years. He had positioned himself in my husband's old chair, a detail that felt both presumptuous and symbolic, while I perched nervously on the edge of the couch. I'll get straight to the point, he began, as if this were a business meeting rather than a reunion between mother and child. I've been thinking about our situation, and I realize it's time to resolve things. I'm ready to move back and take care of you properly. The audacity of his words left me speechless. 20 years of silence, and he was presenting his return as if it were a gift he was graciously bestowing upon me. I've done well for myself, he continued, clearly proud of whatever success he had achieved in my absence. I'm in real estate development now, and I can see that this old house needs significant updates. Don't worry, once it's legally transferred to me, I'll make sure everything is brought up to modern standards. Before we continue, please comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Legally transferred? I finally found my voice. Well, yes. I assume you've already handled the paperwork? You've had 20 years to get everything in order. I know we parted on difficult terms, but I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. Family is family, after all. The casual cruelty of his assumption took my breath away. He had constructed an entire narrative in which his abandonment was justified. His return was magnanimous, and my role was simply to hand over everything I had worked for while gratefully accepting his presence back in my life. You assume I've already signed the house over to you? I asked quietly. Haven't you? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. Mother, surely you understand that this house is my inheritance. It's what Dad would have wanted. The mention of his father, my beloved husband who had died never knowing that his son would abandon me so completely, sparked something fierce in my chest. Your father, I said slowly, would have wanted his son to be there for his mother when she needed him most. Brandon waved his hand dismissively. Let's not get emotional about this. The past is the past. What matters now is moving forward practically. So yes, I assume you've already put the house in my name? This was it. This was the moment I had unknowingly been preparing for during all those years of silence. I looked into my son's eyes that showed no remorse, no love, no recognition of the woman who had raised him. And I made my choice. Yes, I lied smoothly. I put the house in your name years ago. The relief that washed over his face was almost comical. Good. Good. I knew you'd come around eventually. You always were practical when it came down to it. He leaned back in the chair, clearly pleased with how easily his plan was falling into place. There's just one small detail we need to discuss, I continued, watching his expression carefully. Oh? What's that? Well, since the house was already legally yours, I took the liberty of making some arrangements. You see, I gave it to someone else. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Brandon's mind working, trying to process what I had just said. His face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a slow-burning anger that I recognized from his childhood tantrums. What do you mean, you gave it to someone else? How can you give away something that belonged to me? Oh, but that's where you're wrong, I said, standing up and moving toward the window where I could see Jake teaching the twins how to build a snowman in our backyard. You see, I never actually put the house in your name. I lied just now, the same way you've been lying to yourself for 20 years about what family actually means. The explosion I expected never came. Instead, Brandon sat very still, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Mother, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. This house is my birthright. You can't just decide to give it away to strangers. Strangers? I turned back to face him. Brandon, those strangers have been my family for the past 15 years. They've been here through illnesses and celebrations, through ordinary Tuesdays and special occasions. They've shown me more love and respect in 15 years than you showed me in the 22 years you lived under this roof. For the first time since his arrival, Brandon looked genuinely shaken. You can't be serious. These people have clearly manipulated you, taken advantage of an elderly woman living alone. We can fight this legally. We can prove that you weren't in your right mind when you made these decisions. The patronizing tone, the automatic assumption that I couldn't make rational decisions about my own life, the complete inability to consider that maybe, just maybe, his actions had consequences, all of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Brandon, I said, my voice steady and sure, let me tell you exactly what's going to happen next. But just as I was about to deliver the revelation that would change everything, we heard the front door open and a familiar voice calling out, Grandma Diane, we brought the wine you asked for. Brandon's head snapped toward the sound, his expression shifting to something I had never seen before. A kind of stunned recognition that made his face go completely white. And that's when I realized that the universe's sense of timing was even more perfect than I had imagined. The voice belonged to Jake's sister Rebecca, who had driven in from the next state to spend Christmas with us. But it wasn't Rebecca who had caused Brandon's face to drain of all color. It was the young man walking in beside her. Sorry we're late, Mrs. Diane, called out a voice I didn't recognize. Traffic was insane coming through downtown, and then we stopped to pick up. The young man stopped mid-sentence when he entered the living room and saw Brandon sitting in the chair. The resemblance between them was unmistakable. The same jawline, the same build, even the same way of holding their shoulders when they felt defensive. But where Brandon's eyes held calculation and entitlement, this young man's showed genuine shock and something that looked almost like pain. Dad? The young man whispered, his voice barely audible. Brandon stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over the chair. Tyler, what are you doing here? What is this? And suddenly, all the pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began falling into place. This was Brandon's son, my grandson, a young man I had never met, never even known existed. But more than that, from the way Tyler was looking at Lily with obvious affection, and the way she immediately moved to his side with protective concern, I realized there was a much deeper story here. Tyler is my son-in-law, I said slowly, watching Brandon's face carefully. He married my daughter Emma last month. Your daughter? Brandon's voice cracked slightly. Mother, Emma is 8 years old. She's not your daughter. She's some stranger's child that you've gotten inappropriately attached to. Tyler stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Don't you dare talk about Emma's family like that. And for your information, Emma is my sister-in-law. I married Lily's daughter, Sarah. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. You know, the daughter you abandoned along with her mother when she was 3 years old? The silence in the room was suffocating. I felt like I was watching a movie where crucial scenes had been cut out, leaving me to piece together a story I was only now beginning to understand. Brandon had not only abandoned me, he had abandoned a wife and child as well. Sarah? I looked at Lily, who was now pale and trembling slightly. Lily nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Diane. I should have told you everything from the beginning, but it was so complicated, and I didn't want to burden you with my problems. Your problems? Brandon laughed bitterly. You were the problem, Lily. You and your constant demands for commitment and responsibility. I was 25 years old. I wasn't ready to be tied down by a wife and kid. Tied down? Tyler's voice rose with indignation. She was your wife. Sarah was your daughter. You didn't just abandon Mrs. Diane. You abandoned your entire family. And suddenly, everything made sense. The reason Lily had no family nearby when she moved next door. The reason she had been working so hard to support herself through nursing school. The reason she had been so grateful for the smallest kindnesses, so devoted to creating the stable family life she had never had. "Lily," I said gently, "how long have you known who I was?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "From the first day I moved in next door, I recognized your last name on the mailbox. Sarah used to ask about her grandmother all the time when she was little, wondering if you knew about her, if you would want to meet her. When I realized you were Brandon's mother, I thought maybe if I got to know you first, I could figure out if you were someone I wanted in Sarah's life." "Where is Sarah now?" I asked, my heart breaking for the granddaughter I had unknowingly been denied for so many years. "She's at college," Tyler answered. "She'll be home tomorrow for Christmas dinner. She has no idea that her father is here, and honestly, after what he put her and Lily through, I'm not sure she'd want to see him anyway." Brandon had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation. "This is ridiculous. You people have created some kind of elaborate fantasy where you're all one big happy family, but the reality is that Lily was a mistake I made when I was too young to know better. I never promised her anything permanent." "You married her," Tyler shot back. "You stood in a church and promised to love and honor her." "I was pressured into that marriage," Brandon replied coldly. "She got pregnant. Her parents threatened to make trouble for me, so I did what I had to do to smooth things over temporarily. But I never intended for it to be permanent." The casual cruelty of his words, the way he dismissed the mother of his child as a mistake and his marriage as a temporary inconvenience, revealed the depth of his selfishness in a way that shocked even me. But what happened next surprised me even more. Lily stepped forward, her tears gone and her voice steady. "Brandon, I want you to know that I stopped caring about your opinion of me years ago, but I will not let you walk into this house, into Mrs. Diane's house, and disrespect the woman who has been more of a mother to me than my own ever was." "My house," Brandon corrected automatically. "She already told me she signed it over to me years ago." "No," Lily said with a small smile. "She told you she put it in your name. She never said she signed it over to you. And as it happens, she put it in my name 3 years ago." The look of absolute shock on Brandon's face would have been comical if the situation weren't so tense. "That's impossible. You're lying." I walked over to the desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a folder I had been keeping there for months, knowing that someday this conversation might happen. "Here are the legal documents, Brandon. Lily is now the legal owner of this house. She has been for 3 years. Brandon snatched the papers from my hands, his eyes scanning them frantically. "This can't be legal. You can't just give away property that rightfully belongs to your son." "Actually, I can," I said calmly. "This house was legally mine to do with as I pleased, and I chose to give it to someone who has earned it through years of love, devotion, and genuine care." "But I'm your son." The desperation in his voice was painful to hear. "Yes, you are my son, but Lily has been my daughter. Tyler has been my grandson-in-law. Emma, Michael, and Matthew have been my grandchildren. Sarah, who I haven't even met yet, has been my granddaughter. They have been my family in every way that matters, while you have been nothing more than a memory and a source of pain." Brandon's face cycled through several emotions: disbelief, anger, calculation, and finally, what looked like genuine panic. "You don't understand. I need this house. I've made some investments that haven't panned out, and I was counting on this property to secure a loan. I can't just walk away empty-handed." And there it was, the real reason for his return. Not reconciliation, not love, not even simple greed, but desperation. He had gambled on his assumption that I would always be there as his backup plan, his safety net, his guaranteed inheritance waiting whenever he decided he needed it. "Brandon," I said, my voice softer now because despite everything, he was still the child I had once held in my arms and dreamed dreams for. 20 years ago, you told me that I needed you more than you needed me. You were wrong then, and you're wrong now. I needed a son, not a financial dependent. I needed a family member, not someone who saw me as an investment opportunity. Tyler stepped closer to Lily, his protective instincts clearly activated by the tension in the room. Mr. Brandon, I think you should leave now. You've said enough hurtful things for one evening. Don't you tell me what to do in my own house, Brandon snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. It's not your house, Tyler replied calmly. It never was, and the family you abandoned has built something beautiful here without you. For a moment, I thought Brandon might escalate the confrontation, might let his desperation push him towards saying or doing something truly damaging. But then something in his posture shifted, and I saw not the entitled man who had walked through my door, but the frightened little boy who used to come to me when his plans fell apart. "Mom," he said, and for the first time since his arrival, his voice held something that sounded almost like genuine emotion. "I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But I'm still your son. Doesn't that count for anything?" It was the question I had been dreading, because despite everything he had done, despite all the pain he had caused, the answer was still complicated. He was my son, and some part of me would always love him for that reason alone. Yes, Brandon, it counts for something, but not for everything. Not for 20 years of absence. Not for the pain you caused Lily and Sarah. Not for the entitlement you've shown tonight. "So that's it?" he asked. "I get nothing?" I looked around the room at the family I had chosen and who had chosen me back, at Lily, who had shown me that maternal love could be mutual and reciprocal, at Tyler, who had welcomed me as a grandmother without hesitation, at the children playing in the next room who called me grandma with genuine affection. Brandon, you could have everything if you were willing to earn it the right way. But earning it means acknowledging the pain you've caused, making amends for your actions, and proving through consistent behavior that you understand what family actually means. He stared at me for a long moment, and I found myself hoping, despite everything, that maybe this could be a turning point, that maybe he would choose to begin the hard work of rebuilding the relationships he had damaged. But then his expression hardened again, and I knew that his desperation hadn't led to wisdom, only to a different kind of calculation. "Fine," he said, his voice cold once more. "Keep your house and your fake family, but don't expect me to pretend this is over." And with that ominous statement hanging in the air, he walked toward the door. But just as his hand touched the handle, Tyler cleared his throat. "Actually, Brandon, there's one more thing you should know before you leave." Tyler's voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, something that made even Brandon pause with his hand on the doorknob and turn back around. Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what looked like a legal document. "You see, when I married into this family, I started learning about its history. And when you grow up wondering about a father who abandoned you, you tend to develop certain skills, like knowing how to find people who don't want to be found." Brandon's face went pale again. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that abandoning your family isn't the worst thing you did, is it, Brandon?" Tyler's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath it. "Should I tell everyone here about the money you took from Lily's account when you left? The money she had saved for Sarah's medical expenses when she was sick as a toddler." The blood drained completely from Brandon's face. "I don't know what you're talking about. Or maybe we should discuss the credit cards you opened in Lily's name after you left, the ones that destroyed her credit rating and took her years to sort out legally?" Lily gasped. "Tyler, how did you—" "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago," Tyler said, never taking his eyes off Brandon. "I wanted to know exactly who my wife's father was before I brought him anywhere near our family. What I found was a pattern of financial abuse and abandonment that goes way beyond just walking out on people." Tyler opened the document and began reading. "Shall I go through the list? The business partner you defrauded in Denver? The elderly woman in Phoenix whose savings you helped her invest before disappearing? The 3 different women you married and abandoned, not counting Lily." "3?" I whispered, my hand going to my throat. "Oh yes, Mrs. Diane. Your son has been very busy these past 20 years. currently wanted in 2 states for fraud, with warrants out for his arrest in both Colorado and Arizona. Brandon took a step backward, his cocky demeanor completely evaporated. "You can't prove any of that." Tyler smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Actually, I can. See, that's the beautiful thing about hiring a good private investigator. They document everything very thoroughly." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a phone. "In fact, I've been recording our entire conversation tonight." "You can't do that. That's illegal." "Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to a recording. I consented." Tyler's smile grew wider. "And I have to say, your confession about abandoning your wife and child, your threats against Mrs. Diane, and your admission that you need this house to pay off bad investments are all going to make very interesting listening for the authorities." For the first time since he had arrived, Brandon looked genuinely scared. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Tyler looked around the room at his family, at the woman who had become his grandmother-in-law, at his mother-in-law who had worked so hard to build a good life despite his abandonment, at the children playing in the next room who would grow up knowing they were loved and wanted. "I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. I want you to know that the family you abandoned has thrived without you. And I want you to leave this house and never come back." "And if I don't?" Tyler held up his phone. "Then I make some calls. The kind of calls that result in very serious legal problems for people who have been running from their responsibilities for 2 decades. Brandon looked around the room desperately, as if searching for some ally, some escape route, some way to regain control of a situation that had spun completely beyond his grasp. His eyes finally settled on me. "Mom, you can't let them do this to me. I'm your son." And there it was again, that appeal to blood relation, that assumption that biology trumped everything else. But as I looked at Brandon, I realized that I felt nothing but sadness for the man he had become. "Brandon, you are my son. But that means you're also a reflection of how I raised you, and clearly I failed somewhere along the way. The question now is whether you're going to take this opportunity to finally grow up and take responsibility for your actions, or whether you're going to continue running from the consequences of your choices. I can't go to prison. I'm not built for that kind of life. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you built a life based on lying to and stealing from people who trusted you," Lily said quietly. Her voice was steady, but I could see the tears in her eyes. Not for Brandon, but for the years of wondering if she had somehow been at fault for his abandonment. Tyler stepped closer to Brandon. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this house right now. You're never going to contact Mrs. Diane again. You're never going to come near Lily or Sarah or any member of this family. And you're going to turn yourself in to the authorities and face the consequences of what you've done. And if I don't agree to those terms? Then I make the calls tonight, and by morning there will be law enforcement officers looking for you in 3 states instead of 2. Brandon stared at Tyler for a long moment, clearly trying to calculate his options. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "This isn't fair," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Fair?" Lily laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you left me alone with a sick 3-year-old and no way to pay for her medical care? Was it fair when you destroyed my credit rating and left me unable to qualify for an apartment or a car loan for years? Was it fair when you disappeared from Sarah's life and left her wondering what she had done wrong to make her father not want her?" For just a moment, something flickered in Brandon's eyes. What might have been shame or regret. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll go. But don't expect me to thank you for destroying my life." "We didn't destroy your life, Brandon," I said softly. "You did that all by yourself. We're just refusing to let you destroy ours in the process." He looked at me one last time, and I found myself hoping that somehow, even at this late stage, he might find the words to apologize, to show some recognition of the pain he had caused, to demonstrate that somewhere inside him was still the little boy I had once loved so fiercely. But all he said was, "Goodbye, Mother. I hope your new family makes you happy." And with that, he walked out of my house and my life for what I knew would be the final time. The silence after the door closed was profound. We all stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened, dealing with the emotional aftermath of a confrontation none of us had fully anticipated. Finally, Tyler broke the silence. "Mrs. Diane, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I know he's your son, and I know this couldn't have been easy." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, people who had chosen to love me and whom I had chosen to love in return. "Tyler, you protected this family tonight. You protected me. And you gave Brandon exactly what he deserved, the consequences of his own actions." Lily moved closer to me and took my hand. "Are you okay?" I squeezed her hand and smiled. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart. I'm free." And I was. For 20 years, I had carried the weight of wondering if I had failed as a mother, if there was something I could have done differently to keep my son from leaving, something I should have said or done to bring him back. But seeing him tonight, seeing the man he had chosen to become, I finally understood that his departure hadn't been about me at all. It had been about him, about his inability to value anything that couldn't be converted into personal gain, about his fundamental failure to understand what love and family actually mean. "So," Jake said, appearing in the doorway with Emma perched on his shoulders and the twins flanked on either side, "did we miss anything exciting?" We all looked at each other and burst into laughter, the kind of cathartic laughter that comes after surviving something difficult together. Emma giggled along with us, not understanding what was funny but happy to be part of the family joy. "Nothing we can't handle as a family," I said, and I meant every word. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the adults had shared a quiet drink by the fireplace, Tyler pulled me aside. "Mrs. Diane, there's something else I want to tell you. About Sarah." My heart jumped. "Is she okay?" "She's more than okay. She's brilliant and kind and strong, just like her mother. And she's been wanting to meet you for years. But she was afraid that if she reached out, it might cause problems for Lily." "Problems?" "She was worried that if you knew about her, you might feel obligated to help financially or emotionally, and she didn't want to be a burden. She wanted to wait until she was established enough to approach you as an equal, not as someone who needed rescuing." Tears filled my eyes. "She could never be a burden. She's my granddaughter." "That's exactly what I told her when I called her after dinner tonight. She's driving home first thing in the morning instead of waiting until tomorrow evening. She wants to spend Christmas with her grandmother." And that's how I learned that sometimes the best gifts come disguised as the worst moments. Brandon's return had brought pain and conflict, but it had also brought Sarah back into my life and had given me the chance to finally, definitively, choose my real family over the illusion of obligation to someone who had never valued what I offered. But the story doesn't quite end there, because the next morning brought one more surprise. I was in the kitchen at dawn, preparing Christmas breakfast and enjoying the quiet before the household woke up, when I heard a car door close outside. My first thought was panic. Had Brandon returned? But when I looked out the window, I saw a young woman with Lily's gentle eyes and Brandon's stubborn chin walking up the path with a confidence that was entirely her own. Sarah. I opened the door before she could knock, and for a moment we just stood there looking at each other, grandmother and granddaughter meeting for the first time, both of us seeing echoes of people we had loved and lost in each other's faces. "Grandma Diane?" she said softly, and her voice broke my heart in the most beautiful way. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered. And then she was in my arms, and I was holding my granddaughter for the first time, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the solid reality of this young woman who had grown up without me, but who felt like coming home. We talked for hours that morning while the rest of the family slept in. Sarah told me about her childhood, about how Lily had worked multiple jobs to support them, about the nights when she was little when she would ask her mother why her daddy had left and whether it was something she had done wrong. "Mom always told me it wasn't my fault, but you know how kids are," Sarah said, curled up next to me on the couch with a cup of coffee warming her hands. I spent years wondering if I had been prettier or smarter or quieter. Maybe he would have stayed. Oh, baby, I said, my heart breaking for the little girl she had been. Your father's leaving had nothing to do with you. It was about his own inability to love anyone more than he loved himself. I know that now, she said. But I want you to know that even though he left, I never felt completely without family. Mom made sure I knew that somewhere out there I had a grandmother who would love me if she knew about me. She was right. I would have loved you from the moment I knew you existed. Sarah smiled. Tyler told me what happened last night. How you stood up to him. How you chose our family over his manipulation. Sarah, I need you to understand something. I didn't choose your family instead of Brandon. I chose love instead of obligation. I chose people who value relationships over people who see them as transactions. You and your mother and Tyler and all the rest of us, we're a family because we choose to be every single day. I understand that now. But I also understand that you're my grandmother, and I want to know everything about you. I want to know about my grandfather who died before I was born. I want to know about Brandon when he was young, before he became the man he is now. I want to know about your childhood and your dreams, and what it was like raising a son who turned out so differently from what you hoped. And so I told her. I told her about her grandfather, who had been kind and patient and who would have adored her. I told her about Brandon as a little boy, the good parts, the moments when he had shown kindness or curiosity or joy. Because even though he had become someone I couldn't be proud of, he hadn't been born that way. What changed him? Sarah asked. It was a question I had asked myself thousands of times over the years. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe it was losing his father so young. Maybe it was something I did wrong in raising him. Maybe it was just something in his nature that I couldn't see until it was too late. But what I've learned is that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and you can't love someone into being a better person if they're determined not to change. Do you think he'll ever change? I considered the question carefully. I hope so. I hope that someday he'll hit bottom hard enough to realize that the way he's been living isn't working, and that he'll find the strength to become the person he could have been. But I can't spend my life waiting for that to happen, and neither can you. I won't, Sarah said firmly. I learned a long time ago that you can't build your happiness around someone else's potential. That wisdom, coming from someone so young, made me incredibly proud of the woman she had become despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges she had faced. When the rest of the family woke up, Christmas morning took on a magical quality I hadn't experienced in years. Watching Emma and the twins discover their presents while Sarah helped them unwrap gifts, and Tyler took pictures and Jake made everyone laugh with his terrible Christmas jokes. It felt like the kind of holiday celebration I had dreamed of, but never quite achieved when Brandon was growing up. Later that afternoon, as we were all sitting around the table sharing our Christmas feast, Sarah raised her glass of sparkling cider. I want to make a toast, she said. To Grandma Diane, who showed us that family isn't about blood or obligation or what people owe each other. It's about choosing to love each other every day, even when it's difficult, even when it would be easier to walk away. And to Mom, Tyler added, raising his own glass toward Lily, who taught all of us what it means to build a family based on love and respect. And to all of us, Jake chimed in, for proving that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. As we clinked glasses around the table, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in 20 years. The house that had once echoed with loneliness and regret was now filled with laughter and love. The rooms that had held my sadness now held children's artwork and family photos, and the beautiful chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed being together. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my living room looking at the Christmas tree surrounded by torn wrapping paper and scattered toys, and I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Brandon's abandonment had been devastating, but it had also cleared the way for something better. His return had been painful, but it had given me the chance to finally, definitively, close that chapter of my life. 3 months later, I got a call from Tyler. Brandon had indeed turned himself into the authorities, as Tyler had insisted he do. He was facing charges in multiple states, but his lawyer had negotiated a plea deal that would keep him out of prison in exchange for restitution to his victims and community service. "Do you want me to give you updates on how he's doing?" Tyler asked. "No," I said without hesitation. "That part of my life is over." And it was. I never heard from Brandon again, never wondered about his fate, never felt the need to know whether he had finally learned the lessons life was trying to teach him. I had spent 20 years of my life hoping he would change, waiting for him to return, questioning my own worth based on his absence. I wasn't going to spend whatever years I had left doing the same thing. Instead, I focused on the family I had chosen and who had chosen me. I watched Emma graduate from elementary school and start middle school. I helped Michael and Matthew learn to ride bicycles. I celebrated Sarah's graduation from college and her acceptance to graduate school. I danced at Tyler and Sarah's renewed wedding vows on their 5th anniversary. And when people asked me about my family, I talked about my daughter Lily, who had become a head nurse at the hospital, about my grandson Tyler, who had started his own construction company, about my granddaughter Sarah, who was working toward her master's degree in social work, about my great-grandchildren who called me grandma and meant it with their whole hearts. Sometimes people would ask about my son, the one who had abandoned me. And I would smile and say, I chose to focus on the children who chose to stay. Because that's what I learned from this whole experience. That love isn't something you owe people because of biology or history or guilt. Love is something you give freely to people who value it, who reciprocate it, who understand that relationships require effort from both sides. Brandon never learned that lesson. He thought love was something you could take for granted, something that would always be available when you decided you needed it, something you could withdraw from like a bank account without ever making deposits. But the family I built after he left understood that love is something you tend like a garden, that it requires daily attention, consistent care, and the willingness to weather difficult seasons together. And that's why, when people ask me if I have any regrets about how things turned out, I can honestly say no. I don't regret the years Brandon was gone, because those were the years I discovered who I really was when I wasn't defined by someone else's absence. I don't regret the pain of his abandonment, because that pain cleared the way for deeper joys than I had ever imagined possible. Most of all, I don't regret choosing my real family over the illusion of what Brandon and I might have had if he had been a different person. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives you is the opportunity to start over. Brandon's abandonment gave me that gift, even though I didn't recognize it at the time. His return gave me the chance to finally, completely, gratefully accept it. And you, what would you do if you were in my place? Do you think I went too far with anything? Comment below and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for following me this far.